Greetings, friends. Ken McAuliffe here. I am the jazz vinyl lover, and tonight I'd like to talk to you about maybe part one of what I consider to be the 20 greatest records to build a jazz collection, or you could call it the which record should I start with if I'm getting into jazz. I get that question a lot at the Jazz Record Center, and I never quite know how to answer it because people are all coming from a different place. Some people have heard no jazz at all, which is very often the case. So, most people say, well, give them Miles Davis' Kind of Blue, which is a really soothing album and one they can go to sleep to pretty quickly. I think there are other Miles Davis albums worth starting with than that. But I wanted to recommend a general 20, and none of them are Blue Notes. Because everyone seems to have this Blue Note fetish. I know I do. These are all Blue Notes, from First Presses to Liberties to whatever. But I just thought I would go through these, and I literally just pulled these out in about 10 minutes. And these are all really great records to start with. The first one being Shelly Manne and His Men at the Black Hawk Volume 1. I believe there's volumes 1 through 4. These were all recorded live. I think at Shelly Manne's Hole or the Lighthouse. At the Black Hawk, whatever. But these are extremely well recorded records. They're all really in the pocket. They swing really well. And it's West Coast. So it's got kind of a really easy vibe to it. And everyone plays their asses off. Shelly Manne, I don't have my glasses on. Joe Gordon, Richie Kamuka, Victor Feldman, Monty Budwig. Just first class West Coast players. I think Victor Feldman was probably in the East Coast as well for a while. Wrote the great 7 Steps to Heaven that Miles covered. Victor Feldman records are really hard to find. There's some later stuff that's a little bit easier, but in general, they're just really hard to find, and he plays his butt off. In fact, there's a Victor Feldman record with Stan Levy and Scott LaFaro. It's the first recording of Scott LaFaro, who went on to play with Bill Evans and then died at a very young age, a really amazing, innovative bass player. And you can put innovative bass players on about one hand, really. But he was one of the masters. And then another guy who was pretty much lost to time, Mose Allison. Mose did a lot of records for Atlantic. I guess late 50s, early 60s. I think he was really popular. I run into new records of his all the time. I mean, like all the time. If you're looking at stores in the Northeast, you just kind of bump into them because they're sort of party records and they're a lot of fun. Because he's a real storyteller. He's got a great way of playing piano. I don't have my glasses on once again, so I can't tell who's in this group. But all these Atlantic records, when you can find them, they're cheap. Because he's kind of like Gene Ammons and Eddie Lockjaw Davis. And Shirley Scott, people just kind of look right past them. And those are really some wonderful jazz records. Mose Allison Swing Machine, I bet I paid $7 for that. This is a new record, but it's a great record. Christian McBride, epitomizes what jazz is all about, really. And this is a storming record. This is his latest big band record, Bringing It, and they certainly do. And there's some unusual arrangements on here. They do Thermo, the great Freddie Hubbard tune, because Freddie Hubbard sort of gave Christian McBride his first break. I Thought About You, which I always associate with Frank Sinatra. But McBride's version is kind of dark, and he said he based it on, I interviewed him for Downbeat, he said he based it on Miles Davis's version. They do Full House with the great Wes Montgomery tune with the horn section playing the Wes Montgomery solo, I believe, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. And in the wee small hours of the morning, it's a 2 LP set. That one's easy to find. This is also pretty easy to find. You better grab it. This came out on Record Store Day as a 2 LP box set, and that's already extremely hard to find and very valuable. Then Sam Records from Spain, or is it France, they do incredible reissues. They're all pristine and they all go out of print really quickly. And this was an alternate soundtrack that Monk did for La Liaisons Dangerous. I can't pronounce the name. But they ended up using Miles Davis's soundtrack for this instead of Monk's. And the great thing about this is it's a really great band. Sam Jones and Art Taylor. Art Taylor, one of the great unsung drummers and writers of jazz. Monk's usual drummers would be Frankie Dunlop or Ben Riley, I believe, who had a certain sort of loping, popping, really great thing going on. But Art Taylor, who put out a couple of great albums on his own, Taylor's Wailers and AT's Delight, both on Blue Note, I believe. Art had a totally different, hip, very forward motion style. He wasn't quite as laconic and laid back as Dunlop and Ben Riley, as great as those guys are. So this is a really energetic record, and coming from Sam, it's extremely well remastered. I bought this on Dusty Groove for like 23 bucks, I think. So that was great. Everyone should have a Hank Mobley record, and this is my favorite Hank Mobley record. And this is a Music Matters pressing. You get all the beautiful artwork. You know, this is a great band. Art Blakey, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers. This just, if there's a perfect jazz album, and there are actually quite a few, this is one of them. This is a beautiful recording, and his tunes are so great. They're in the pocket, they're swinging. He has such a beautiful, rich tenor sound. I always tell people, if we're going to start with Hank Mobley, you either get Soul Station, or the one that followed it was just Hank Mobley, or then you run up to like Workout or No Room for Squares. But this early period stuff, maybe still in the Jazz Messengers then, this is a really beautiful record. Next, one of Sonny Rollins' masterpieces, Alfie. This was recorded in the UK. This was the soundtrack for the movie starring Michael Caine, which is a really great movie you should check out. This soundtrack is so dramatic and has so many moods. It's a really bold record. When I have people over here and I play this for the first time, they're always just floored because it's so dynamic, and there's some amazing Sonny Rollins solos on here, as well as great solos by Kenny Burrell and Roger Kellaway. Arrangements by Oliver Nelson. That's a big part of why this reason is so great. Sonny Rollins is a towering figure in jazz, but I think he maybe needed an editor. That's just my 3 cents. I love all his early Blue Note records. Whatever, this is a great, great record. And this is probably a lot to take for a beginner, but it's one you should buy and keep because it's a Broadway production. It's big and it's bold, even though it's just really a large ensemble. I think this is the mono press, which I took forever to find. And this is really astounding. A great example of Sonny Rollins, Oliver Nelson, and I guess this is not Rudy Van Gelder, but what a great record. I also think everyone should have Eddie Lockjaw Davis in their collection. You know, what they call grits and gravy, a bar walker, you know, low down. And he was a great tenor player in Count Basie's band before he went out on his own. I have the record where it's Count Basie presents Eddie Lockjaw Davis. But this is really the blues and slow tempos, a prime example of Rudy Van Gelder's recording work, usually with Shirley Scott, Arthur Edgehill on drums, just in the pocket, slow, low down, you know, as where I think Hank Mobley is very sophisticated, very sharp, you know, a wonderful songwriter, and such an iconic style. Eddie comes more out of the tradition of the saxophone, to me, out of Coleman Hawkins and Lester Young, and just laying it in the cut, you know, really slow tempos. I guess coming from the period when they had organ trios throughout the Northeast, and you always had Willis Jackson or whoever, you had a tenor player with an organ player. And here it's, they did a series of these cookbook records on Prestige. This might be the first one with Jerome Richardson on flute, and Shirley Scott and George Vivian Baith and Arthur Edgehill. Once again, these are records that I think a lot of people just pass up when they find them. They're not expensive. They are hard to find in good shape because these were party records. People put these records on and had fun, even though they're really slow. I guess they're maybe late night records, you know, you're kind of tanked and you're sitting there on the couch. But they're beautiful records. There are many Miles Davis records you can get, but you can't go wrong with working, cooking, steaming, relaxing. I can't remember, there's one other one. These were the 5 records that Miles recorded to get out of his Prestige contract so he could go to Columbia. And I believe he did all the 5 records in like 5 days. And that band with Red Garland, Coltrane, Philly Joe Jones, Paul Chambers, right? Yeah, they were playing all the time. So they just went in the studio and just knocked this stuff out. And this is, you know, the epitome of jazz, American songbook, incredible improvisations, beautiful ensemble work, beautiful Miles stuff. And if you can find these, once again, when you find these records, they've been well played because they're great records. But they're worth searching out and they're worth buying in the earliest presses you can get because the sound on these Rudy Van Gelder recordings is great. Somebody else who's sort of forgotten but made a ton of records and they're all great, Gene Ammons. You know, he was more of a blowing guy. You know, Gene Ammons, Eddie Lockjaw Davis. I think of Eddie as more of as a small ensemble guy, very intimate. You know, his small group. It's very intimate with you when you're listening to him. But Gene Ammons is very extroverted. Everything is big, and he made a shitload of records. I think he had a heroin habit, so he was in and out of prison a lot. But look at the beautiful lamination of that cover. Once again, Rudy Van Gelder. I think this was Joe Newman on trumpet, Jack McDuff, Wendell Marshall, Ray Barretto, Walter Perkins on drums. The problem with some of these records for me is from this period, again, late 50s through mid 60s, there's a lot of, Ray Barretto, because the Latin thing was starting to happen now in Mongo Santa Maria. You get a lot of records which through the whole record, and it drives you bananas. But some people don't mind that, and it definitely grooves really hard. And there are a lot of these records, and they're all really in the pocket, and they're fun. They're really great, and all these great players too. You have to have a Count Basie record. A Count Basie was 16 guys who sounded like one guy. It sounded like a giant Count Basie, his piano, and then a band, but they were like playing as one. Incredibly dynamic, big riffs, famous tunes like Little Darlin' and Cute that all jazz musicians learn as they're coming up to play jazz. This was the Columbia twofer I got for $4 at Princeton Record Exchange. Awesome. John Coltrane made many records, but this in many ways is his breakthrough. If you get early Prestige records, I read his biography. He's still making his way out of being a heroin addict or a smackhead or whatever it was. But on this record, everything comes together. And Giant Steps is one of the classics. And he's playing Giant Steps, which I believe refers to the chordal pattern, which no one had done at that point. Finding new ways into the horn, which later on he obviously found even bigger ways through the horn. And this, once again, I believe is with Arthur Taylor. Yes. Arthur Taylor, he's such an amazing drummer, did tons of Blue Note sessions. He's just got this popping energy, constantly popping. Great, great energy, always pushing it forward, but very sparse in his own way. Arthur Taylor also wrote a great book where he interviewed all the guys he played with, kind of like Milt Hinton, who photographed everybody he played with. But Taylor did a book, and it's a great read because all these famous musicians tell him exactly what they think because he's one of them. But this has Naima, Mr. PC. These are great classics of the Coltrane repertoire. Countdown, Spiral, Cousin Mary, Giant Steps. This might be his last album on Atlantic. I'm not sure. No, probably not. He has a series of records on Atlantic, right? But this one has a lot of classic tunes, and I believe it's a real breakthrough. And it sounds, actually it doesn't sound all that great. This is the first pressing, and the bass is so loud and boomy. I don't know what was up with Tom Dowd. If you know, tell me. Because a lot of these, I don't have the new Atlantic mono box. I'd love to get it. But this record, no matter what system I ever played it on, the bass is just woo, woo, woo. But Train is burning it up. And these songs are classics. And if you're going to get into jazz, you got to have a Coltrane record. Also worth searching out are the Pacific Jazz records from the West Coast. Great players like Carmel Jones, Bud Shank, Gary Peacock on bass, Mel Lewis on drums. We don't think of those as West Coast guys. I don't. But all the Pacific Jazz records are really great. They swing really hard, and because it's West Coast again, to my ears, it's got kind of a breezy, a lot of energy happening, kind of a purity. It doesn't have the agitation and the darkness that comes from living in New York City. At least that's my 2 cents. People disagree with me. Another great Miles Davis record, one of 3 that he did with Gil Evans, Porgy and Bess. I only really, tell you the truth, got into this pretty recently because I was always way into Miles ahead because I loved all those tunes on there. But this is an amazing record, very orchestral. You can hear the 30th Street Studios where they recorded it at, Columbia where they recorded all of Miles' records, and Simon and Garfunkel and Bob Dylan. And on this record you can really hear the studio. It's big. It's a big old wooden church. Beautiful orchestrations, great composing. I'm not sure if they do covers on here or not. On Miles Ahead they do Kurt Weill. There are a lot of Impulse records, and here in the Northeast, Impulse records are hard to find. I don't know why. They are. And when you find them, they're also played. Chico Hamilton records are a little bit easier to find. And I like them because even though they're sort of period pieces, they've got a groove. He has a very arid, dry, punchy style. Gabriel Szabo on guitar was a real innovator. You hear him now, and he sounds, he's a very kind of Middle Eastern guitar player. Really hit pictures. There's a lot of Chico Hamilton records. Albert Stinson on bass, who was best friends with Jim Keltner, of all people. Charles Lloyd on tenor, Chico Hamilton, Gabriel Szabo on guitar. These just have a really great vibe. They're nice to put on. To me, they're really chilled records, but they're also a little out in places. These are easy to find, but when you do find them, they can be beat up. A dog ate on that one. They have beautiful laminated covers. And again, Rudy Van Gelder sessions. I paid $18 for this. Just a couple more. Another great Impulse classic, McCoy Tyner. Ballads and Blues, I believe with Roy Haynes. Or no, Lex Humphreys and Steve Davis. I believe this is pre-Coltrane. I could be wrong. But his early records on Impulse, he was a really beautiful, articulate, flowing player before he got with Train. And Train, brought out of him these giant thundering chords that created part of the Coltrane sound. But these records are just, exemplary examples of jazz piano trio. McCoy had his own thing. He didn't sound like Hank Jones, didn't sound like Tommy Flanagan. He just totally had his own thing. A beautiful, really hip player. And this is a great record. You can see how young he is. Worth looking for, even if it's a reissue. Another great Shelly Man, and this is a classic 1, 2, 3. There's some wild stuff happening on this record. They take the A Train, right, where they change the tempo throughout the tune. It's a trio. It's easy to get into. Who's on here? The great Hank Jones, and again, George DeVivier. This has been reissued, I believe, on Analog Productions. Great recording. Shelly Manne is the hippest dude on the West Coast, maybe the most open-minded. Played with Ornette Coleman, played with the great Poll Winners records with Barney Kessel and Ray Brown. Those are also classics and not hard to find. Finally, and this is not that hard to find, Jim Hall, who is the father of modern jazz guitar. I know that Bill Frisell, John Scofield, Pat Metheny have all said it sort of starts with Jim Hall. I guess it really starts with Charlie Christian, but in the modern era, Jim Hall and his beautiful single note lines. This is a great recording. It's really kind of mellow, but it's a beautiful record. So that's part one, and let me know what you think. And I'll have part two pretty soon. And thanks for looking in. I'm Ken McAuliffe, Jazz Vinyl Lover, signing off.